Hello and welcome to the Icario podcast, where we help you optimize your life, become a force to be reckoned with, and break free from the human zoo. I do believe that was in a slightly different order than other episodes.
You're remixing it a little bit, but that's...
I'm making it up as I go along. So with your hosts, hello once again with your hosts, Ollie, myself, and we have...
And I'm Shane. And the third point you mentioned here is the human zoo. Which is a concept we talk about a lot, and we wanted to dedicate an episode to just talking about, well, what is the human zoo? Because it's one of those things that for us on the team, this has a lot of meaning, and I think everybody on the team can kind of unpack what that means, the human zoo and breaking free from the human zoo. But it is packaged, which is like, it's not immediately obvious. I think you can tell kind of what it's about, but let's clearly define what we mean by the human zoo and why we think it's worth breaking out of it. So let's start with the origin of the term, because I didn't come up with this. I borrowed this from Christopher Ryan from his book, Civilized to Death. And here's the context in which he mentions the human zoo. He says, "The modern world is the ultimate human zoo, designed, created, administered, and occupied by humans. Tragically, the zoo we've designed for ourselves is a poor reflection of the world in which our species evolved, and is thus a profoundly unhealthy, unhappy place for too many of the human animals it contains." This is how he describes the human zoo in the book, and this idea really stuck with me. I think he uses the term only once or twice in the book. It seems to me to be like a perfect encapsulation of a wide range of problems. And the reason a human zoo, or reason the term zoo is a good term, is because this is what literally happens when you put animals in a zoo. And this is especially true for old school zoos, right? So a lot of zoos, I think, are modernizing now, where if you go visit the zoo, then they try to make an as natural as possible habitat, and sometimes even like make sure that the animals don't see the visitors and things like that. So this is changing, but it used to be, a couple of decades ago, a zoo was just relatively small cages with animals in them. And what happens is that there's this extreme degeneration that happens to animals in captivity. So you will have animals developing tics. You will have animals doing things like, pulling out their own fur and things like that. And so clearly this, like, psychologically is terrible for an animal to be stuck in a cage instead of in its natural environment. And obviously the same is true for a person, right? You cage a person, they go mad in various ways.
Yeah.
But there's also physical degeneration, which is, I think, an important point, as we're going to talk about that too. I think that's sometimes the less obvious thing, but that's another thing. Like, you stick animals in a zoo, they physically degenerate pretty horribly. And a kind of a famous example of this, I think, is the orca's back fin. So orcas in the wild have this tall fin on their back. And in captivity, so, if you go to whatever it's called, Ocean World or whatever, where they have... SeaWorld, yeah, where they have orcas in captivity, their back fins, they look like they flop over. They basically no longer stand upright. And that's just kind of an obviously visible thing. Like, that only happens in captivity. And it happens for various reasons, right? It might be something about nutrition. It might be something about the environment they're in, like the water they're in. And it might also be like psychosomatic.
Yeah.
But the point is, you can clearly see this degeneration happening. And yeah, this is obviously, it doesn't take much to understand that sticking an animal in a cage is not good for that animal. Like, you wouldn't want to be the animal in that cage.
Yeah.
And but that's the thing. You are an animal in a cage. Like, if you've grown up in modern civilization, you're one of those caged animals in many, many ways. In ways that are less obvious than if you were just literally stuck in a cage, but in many ways nonetheless. And I think the clearest sign of this is what's called a disease of civilization. Disease of civilization is a disease that you cannot find in basically tribal people, in pre-civilized people. And diseases of civilization range very widely. Loads and loads of things that we suffer from, that we think is normal, is stuff that you cannot find outside of modern civilization. And it is also a matter of physical degeneration. So an example of this is most of our dental issues. If you've ever wondered, like, how come I had to go to the dentist from a relatively young age? And for many of us, it's like an ongoing saga of all the stuff that's wrong with our teeth. Constantly we have to drill and fill and squeeze and change and stretch and all kinds of unpleasant stuff, which would make you think, well, this is really poorly designed. This human mouth is really poorly designed. This must have been horrible, right? Pre-dentist. This must have been terrible. Turns out, no. There's this book by an author called, is it Winston Price? Something Price, I think. Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, I think it is. This guy basically at the turn of the century went around to the edges of civilization, essentially. So as industrial civilization was spreading, it was obviously it didn't arrive everywhere at once. So it would arrive in city centers and then kind of spread out from there, right? So for example, railway connections and factories being built and so on kind of spreads out. And he would go to the edge of that to see, okay, over here we have people who have been reached by industrial civilization, and over there we have people who are neighbors who haven't been reached by this yet. And he saw that, but almost immediately, right, within a matter of years, this is one of the things you see. The people in civilization have all kinds of dental issues. Their jaws are all misaligned. Their teeth are rotting, all kinds of crap. And the pre-civilized people all have these perfect jaws full of perfect teeth. And they never go to the dentist, and they don't need to.
That is crazy. That's like a plague. It's like right on the edge, and you could just say to these people who have got great teeth and everything, oh, by the way, it's coming.
Yeah.
Like if had that been like a pathogen or a virus that causes that, it's like it's on the way.
It's exactly like that, yeah, and it spreads. And we've basically forgotten about this because, yeah, we have no memory of this, right? Like I grew up in civilization. My parents grew up in civilization. We have no memory of what it was like before. And there are tons and tons of issues like that. If you look at, yeah, like I said, loads of issues that plague people, including, for example, acne. It's basically normal to have all these skin problems and need to put on God knows what creams and things to try and have normal looking skin. Turns out that's a disease of civilization. And the list goes on and on. It's crazy how many things we suffer from as a result of being in civilization. And again, if you think about the natural habitat of a human versus how we live, there's clearly a big difference. And it's a big difference that makes a big difference. And this is also something like, there is a level of awareness about this, where clearly we know and we keep hearing about all the problems, all the kind of mounting health problems, right? And I have a couple of notes about this, and I'm sure you've heard about loads of these, right?
Yeah.
For example, 45% of adults in the US have hypertension. And worldwide, it's about 1 in 4, so it's about 25% and rising, obviously. Heart disease, so all kinds of heart diseases are the leading cause of death globally. That's the thing that kills. It kills something like 18 million people a year. And the reason this is worth noting is that we tend to think of this as almost like that's what dying of old age is like. Oh yeah, you had a heart attack or something. Like this is not normal because these diseases are preventable. With lifestyle interventions, as they're usually called. So basically better eating usually, and maybe a bit more activity would prevent some amount, probably most of those 18 million deaths, right?
Yeah, it's like in order to help you with this heart disease problem, we need to help you like behave a bit more like a human's always behaved throughout our entire history, and less like we've behaved over the past few hundred years.
Yeah,
just move a bit and eat things that are actually like whole foods and stuff.
Yeah, to which most people would say, oh, that's too extreme. I can't do that. So alternatively, we're going to basically put you in a coma and crack open your chest and, go in with like knives and shit. It's like, yeah, I'll do that.
I want that. You want to eat a bit healthier? Not in a million years.
Yeah.
Crack open my chest instead. Go on.
Yeah. And of course, there's tons of these, right? Obesity, we all hear about the obesity epidemic. Well, not so much now that there's an actual epidemic going around. but obesity is something that is also just like a result of civilization, right? Very reliably, as modern civilization kind of moves in and rises, people gain weight like crazy. And so, yeah, here are some numbers I found. It's like by 2016, it was estimated about 39% of people over the age of 18 are overweight, and 13% are clinically obese, and that's worldwide, right? So that is basically 1 in 3 people is overweight, and that is overweight like to the degree where it becomes a health problem, right? We're not talking about someone has a bit of a paunch,
A bit of a paunch, bit of chub.
Yeah. No. This is like overweight as a medical issue. Like this is causing problems, right? And and obesity is interesting to think about because it leads to loads and loads of health issues, right? From like the joint wearing to things like hypertension, heart disease, and so on. It's closely linked, and it's just such a steep rise. It's crazy, and that's also something where, of course, and often the story that is told is like, oh, these people they should feed themselves better and they should be less lazy or whatever. It's like, though, well, there's clearly something going on where the environment is causing this. You can't point at billions and billions of people and be like, this is all a matter of your individual responsibility. It's like, hold on, something else is going on here, right? And that's also what a disease of civilization is. Like in many cases, of course, you can say, yes, if you changed the way you live, if you changed these, things in your life, then you could avoid these diseases. But the cause of the disease is the environment you find yourself in, which is basically inhumane. And these are, if we look at things like heart disease, obesity, and so on, these are easily measurable problems. And I think we can often be actually distracted by how bad things are by just looking at the easily measurable stuff, right? The obvious stuff. Because what's also on the rise are things like suicide and self-harm. And I mentioned suicide and self-harm specifically because those are not fudgeable. Because sometimes when people talk about the rise of mental health issues, kind of the canned retort to this is, oh, but that's just self-reporting. People are more aware of mental health and they report these issues more. It's like, okay, we can have an argument about that, but more people are killing themselves and harming themselves, and being hospitalized for self-harm. Okay, that is not a kind of a subjective, I just feel I'm just more sensitive to feeling bad these days. No. This is something really bad is going on. And even those are just, that's the tip of the iceberg, right? Because for everyone who takes it that far that they start cutting themselves or kill themselves, how many people are just suffering mental problems that don't lead to hospitalization, that don't show up in a statistic?
Yeah.
And this is also one of those things that is just drastically on the rise. I mean, it's shockingly on the rise, this kind of mental health issue.
I couldn't believe it when I learned that in the UK it was the biggest killer of men. I think it's under 40. I was just like, no, surely not. Surely there's something else. Surely something in nature is killing us more than ourselves. But apparently not.
Yeah, and that's crazy, right? That's a crazy place to arrive at, where so many people just can't take it anymore and kill themselves.
If that's your last option, like you're overriding your survival instinct, then things have to be pretty bad.
Mm-hmm. And this, again, because we can see this, it's a systemic issue, which is to say that, it affects essentially the entire population. It's predictable. Like you can tell, okay, for example, when social media use goes up, then these mental health issues and hospitalizations and so on go up, right? It's predictable. So that is why I think the human zoo is a really good way of thinking about it. It is an environment that we find ourselves in that is inhumane and that causes all these problems as a knock-on effect.
I'm thinking, yes, but I almost anticipate here, and this isn't my argument, but I can almost anticipate some people as I come back to that, saying, are things really that bad though? That seems cynical. That seems like over the top. Is it really that bad? You know, with technology and stuff, is there not a whole wealth of benefits that you're excluding from the picture there? Or, you know, I can just imagine that there'll be a comeback such as that.
Yeah, which I think is really valid. And I want to make it clear that, you know, I'm not a Luddite, and I'm not saying, okay, the solution is let's, you know, tear off our clothes and run naked into the woods and be animals again. Because there's clearly also downsides to just living as a naked animal in the wild. And civilization has definitely brought many benefits with it. And there's also there are like two sides of the coin again, because on the one hand, I do think that, for example, medical advancements is amazing. The things that that just medical science has done for human well-being, absolutely amazing. Although medicine solves many of the problems that civilization causes, and that's even true for things, you know, like plagues and whatnot. Well, the plagues are a civilization problem. They're everyone bunched together. That's when it gets dangerous, right? We're also, for example, sanitation, like the fact that you have a flushable toilet, one of the greatest health benefits in the world, in the civilized world. because the civilized but pre-flush toilet world, that's a crappy place to live, quite literally.
I was just about to say, that pun intentional.
Yeah. So that is a massive, unbelievable innovation, right? Unbelievable that we managed the waste of billions of people like this. Unbelievable innovation. It's such a boon for everyone. But again, it solves a problem that's caused by civilization. And I think with medicine, quite a lot of it is also like that, where yes, we've done amazing things, amazing progress. But yeah, we're solving problems that were caused by the human zoo. But then, you know, there are certainly things where I think one of them is probably child mortality. As far as I know, this is one of the problems of the human animal, is that because of our brain size, so we just kind of over-prioritized brain size over everything else. That's why we're otherwise pretty puny. And one of the problems is like that's also why we essentially are prematurely born, right? Unlike other animals, human babies are useless for pretty long. and that's obviously evolutionarily not great. That you have this completely helpless thing that you have to take care of for so long. But one of the reasons this happens is because you have to get the baby out as long as it can still fit through the birth canal, and the size of the head is the limiting factor there. And as far as I know, this is a real problem and a tragic problem in pre-civilized society, is just a lot of mothers will die in childbirth, and usually the children the baby along with them. And so that the decrease of child mortality and whatever, I'm not sure what it's called when the mother dies, that wouldn't be whatever that is. Right. Basically, mothers and babies dying due to childbirth complications. That reducing that is possibly one of the greatest accomplishments in terms of human well-being and health of civilization.
Yeah.
And I would never discredit that. And also, it depends on your perspective of where you think we're going. But if you have like a Star Trek future perspective, then it's like, yes, all this technological advancement and so on needs to happen in order to get to that better future. So it's like we have to get through this somehow to get to the point where technology can create a new utopia. Now, let's not talk about whether that's likely or not. That's a topic for a different podcast. But also, that's a perspective that I understand. I understand that perspective where you say, okay, that is, some of these downsides are the price we pay for a chance at future prosperity. So I'm not, yeah, you're absolutely right. There are benefits to civilization, absolutely. And I'm not here to discredit those, but I am here to shine a light on all the downsides. And this is primarily because they cause so much suffering, and I'm interested in helping people uplift themselves out of their suffering. And so the awareness of the human zoo and the awareness of how far that goes, I think, is an important step in this, is to start realizing that one of the primary causes of all the suffering. And yeah, so that's, and if you think about the context again, you're stuck in the human zoo, And it's easy to think that, well, it's not really that bad, right? But like, what are you comparing it to? You have no sense of what it's like to not be surrounded by this environment. Like, basically, you have no sense of what it's like to be outside the zoo. And so I think that's another thing where we just forget, or we have no thing to compare it to. Like, we've also talked about this in the context of productivity and focus skills, where, I mean, that's one of the things we teach. We basically teach people how to focus. And most people will say, you know, I'm a pretty radical I'm a pretty radical proponent of what I call the notification-free life. It's like no technology thing is allowed to distract me or interrupt me ever. And I, you know, most apps, like, I don't think I have any of the most popular apps installed on any of my devices. Like because all these things are like these addictive things.
You mean
social media
you're
stuff.
not on TikTok?
I'm not on TikTok.
You're not on TikTok.
Yeah. I know, it's crazy.
Snapchat?
Yeah. And so for most people, when you come out of the normal of how people use their devices and so on, and you hear all the things I don't use, all the things that I recommend you delete, all the things that I recommend you turn off and so on, it's like, well, that seems too extreme. That seems too extreme. But it's like, well, compared to what? You know what I think is extreme? Like, you haven't been in a state of focus for a decade. That's extreme.
Yeah.
You know? And so what are you comparing it to? It's like, because you don't even know what it's like to be in deep focus. You don't know what you're capable of. Basically, most people have no idea what they're capable of, because most things that are like, you know, most things that are performative, most things that are some kind of an accomplishment require focus.
Yeah.
Or they become a lot better with focus. Most people have no idea what they're capable of. And so what are you comparing it to? Of course you can say, well, you know, I installed TikTok, it's not that bad. Yeah, but you come from using Instagram and Snapchat and Twitter and all these other, and yeah, you added another thing and it's not that bad compared to already terrible. Right? So that's the same thing with the human zoo. It's like, we have no idea what freedom would actually feel like. And so it seems like it can't be that bad. And also, everyone around us is suffering the same problem. Everyone is stuck in a zoo, so it feels normal. And in fact, this is one of the problems. I think this is one of the fundamental problems of being alive as a human being in our world in this time, is that if you want to have a good life, you really have to go against the norms. You have to be non-conformist to a pretty extreme degree. Because if your set point of normal is what everyone around you does, well, that's a recipe for misery. And you got to get out, and you have to be comfortable with doing things that are seen as weird and that are seen as extreme compared to the norms you find yourself in.
Yeah. And the thing that comes up is how adaptable we are. Because I was just thinking then, how is it that we reach a point where we feel like, even though it's a pretty shitty situation, we feel like this is normal? And what exactly are we comparing it to? Are we comparing it to a previous state? Or are we comparing our situation with other people? And it's like, where exactly are we making our comparisons to feel that this is normal, would you say?
Well, it's just, what's normal is just what you grow up with. And this is one of the things about being a social animal, is like, we take all our cues from what people around us do. Because, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that makes no sense other than this is how everyone does it, you know? So just like as an example, you know, you see someone walk down the street in a suit, you're like, you doesn't raise an eyebrow, right? This is just completely normal. But if you think about it, it's like, why would you wear a really uncomfortable combination of garments, right? That really quite, like, it limits your mobility because it's not stretchy or anything like that, right? So it like limits your mobility. You have this weird sling around your neck, and it's like, there's no utility in this. It's not very comfortable, and it's more expensive than other clothes. This makes no sense. Why would anyone wear this? But, well, and why? Why don't we think this is strange? Well, because everyone does it. Another favorite of mine is shoes, you know? Shoes are super weird. Like, why are shoes not shaped like feet? Have you ever wondered that? Why are shoes not shaped like feet? Like, imagine, and look, I'm someone who I've been wearing barefoot shoes for ages now. And there's barefoot shoes that more or less look like normal shoes, which I wear those too, but my favorite ones are the ones that actually have toes, right? Individual toes on the shoe. And that's one of those things, right? Obviously, it's very unfashionable. And it's one of those things like, that seems too extreme. That seems too weird. Well, I think it's weird that your shoe does not look like a foot. Imagine walking around with like mitts all the time. All the fucking time. And I'm out here using my individual fingers, and you're like, well, that's weird. No, this is not weird. But it's like, it is so bizarre that we put up with the discomfort of shoes, all the deformities, all the issues that are created from having no contact, no tactile feedback from the ground you're walking on, and having your toes squeezed together and all this crap, right? Having an elevated heel. There's nothing good about this. There's no upside to this. And yet we all do it. And the guy who's walking around with the toe shoes is a weirdo.
Yeah. I mean, could you not make the argument, though, that we had to, I mean, without getting on too much of a tangent, of course, we had to create shoes with support for the foot arch because we walk now on solid surfaces, concrete and wood and all this other stuff. Whereas when you're walking barefoot on the grass, there's no problem with the arch, I've noticed.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that we made shoes to fit another civilization problem?
Yeah, that's true. And I think, also with like heavily like cushioned soles and stuff, because you're always walking on hard, flat surfaces, which is normal. But the toe thing is purely aesthetic. There's no reason not to have. You could have shoes that have a wide enough toe box to let your toes spread. There's no reason not to do that. And what we are doing, it's only aesthetic. And you can tell this especially with women's footwear, because there's just extreme, right?
Yeah, it's crushing.
Yeah.
It really is,
And men get away with a bit less crushing. But really, this is a milder version of like Chinese foot binding, where we look at that and we're like, oh, that's super weird. It's like, yeah, we're doing the light version of that with our feet. We do this for no reason. We deform our feet for no reason other than aesthetics.
So this stuff is essentially how things that are illogical or irrational can remain part of the culture for so long, is because it's essentially if everyone else is doing it.
Yeah.
And that when you said something earlier about the teeth, going to a dentist when I was really, really young, it's like I asked the question, why is that normal? Why is that necessarily normal? Like, you've got to go to the dentist. You're a kid, you need your teeth taken care of. It's like, why are they not fine anyway? I've barely been in the world 5 minutes, and now my teeth apparently need to be drilled and filled and all this other stuff. It's like, what's going on here? And the other thing I've been wondering is, like, acne during, like, as a teenager. I was thinking, in a non-civilized sort of society, is that normal? Because we're always told that that's normal too.
No, apparently not. From what I've heard, this is a purely a disease of civilization. Yeah.
Even that?
Yeah.
It's like when you go through puberty, you get your the acne. It's all just normal.
No.
Yeah.
From what I've heard, like, so, and I come to this from mainly an anthropological perspective. So I've read some really interesting anthropological, like, books about anthropology, and kind of also just case reports of people who've spent time with different tribes and stuff. And so for something like the acne, I'm not sure if this is like, I'm not sure how much evidence there is. It's not like I'm 100% sure that you can't find anyone with acne outside of civilization, right? But I've just read many reports of people spending time with tribes in all corners of the world. And one of the things they tend to remark is everyone's teeth are great, everyone's skin is great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So regarding the teeth, it's also one of those things, you never question it until you start thinking about it. Because there's two things about teeth, and obviously there's more that goes into it than that. Because even with acne, I wouldn't say it's just the food you eat. It's all kinds of stuff. It's the food you eat. it's how stressed you are, it's the pollution in the air, all kinds of stuff could be causes, right? It's a complex problem. And the same with teeth. But there are two things that, like, when you think about it, start making a lot of sense. The first is, why do we have crooked teeth? Well, we never chew anything hard. That's a bit weird, isn't it? Like, when's the last time you chewed something that you really had to chew on properly? And how much of the food you consume is basically mushy? You know? Isn't most of the food we consume pretty soft? And you have muscles in your face and around your jaw. And what happens to muscles if you never use them? They atrophy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I never used my left arm and then I had a weird, like, puny left arm that I can barely use, I'd be like, oh, why is this happening? Well, you never use it. This is not a surprise, right? That's basically what's happening with your jaw muscles, is you never use them. And that's not good for you. And then we also have, like, the mouth breathing and stuff. So, like, your head posture and again, this must be getting so much worse now. Because basically your head posture will affect your mouth and your tongue posture and so on, and all this can then kind of lead to this slow degeneration. And it even connects to how you breathe and so on. And when you think about head posture, and nowadays everybody has like text neck, right? Everybody's like has this kind of forward tilted looking down at the screen. That's your normal posture. And your body is doing all kinds of stuff to compensate for that poor posture. And one of the results of that is a malformation of the jaw and teeth. And the other thing, so that is the simple thing I actually want to talk about, is soft food. We just constantly have soft food. The other thing is sugar. So apparently, and I'll try to find this, because I think I read a study about this where basically say, look, again, it's not quite that simple, but it's almost as simple as this. If you don't eat sugar, you will not have cavities. It's pretty much what it comes down to, right? So if you're wondering as a kid, how come I have to go to the dentist and have to drill and stuff? I've only been around for a short while. Well, you had a lot of sugar in that time, didn't you? You had a lot of refined sugar. And that is, and also, you live in a system where there's lots of companies who want you to have refined sugar, who market refined sugar products to you. And so it becomes a normal part of your life that you're like sugary cereal in the morning. And guess what? That fucks up your teeth.
I'll try and find something also, because that's pretty widespread. Like, that sugar's bad for your teeth. I was taught that as a kid, but then fed sugar by adults too. It's quite weird. But there was something that I read, and I'll try and find this too, that also suggested that, like, if you eat there's certain types of potato chips, for example, that they form like a mush when you've chewed them a bit, and you don't need to chew them much, and they will stick in the teeth. And if you don't brush them or whatever, they can stay, and then the bacteria can cause cavities in that too.
Yeah.
Because apparently, I read this article, and apparently we're talking about how sugar, while having the effect of creating cavities, actually with saliva or fluids, actually washes away relatively easily compared to this starchy potato chippy stuff that just sort of mushes and sticks around the teeth and just sort of rots them away. So I'll try and find that article actually.
Yeah. So we spent some time like ranting about, and I think it's important to point out, like, there's so many things, and I'm sure I'll discover many more in my lifetime, things that like you never questioned, you never thought about before, but then once you see it and once you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, this is crazy. But like we say, that one step is awareness of the human zoo, awareness of the cage that you're inside. But then the other thing is breaking free from the human zoo, which is, that's what we are working on doing. And that's what we want to help people do. And so first of all, let's talk a little bit about how to do that. But first of all, like, realize that you can do that you can break free from the human zoo to a large degree without having to run naked into the woods, like we said before. So you can still live inside civilization, and you can still have a job and do, whatever things you need to do, while opting out or breaking free from loads and loads of things that are causing all of these problems.
Before we do that, I think what we can do is kind of sum up exactly what the human zoo what damage it's causing to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Because before we move on and say how to break free from it, I want to briefly just summarize exactly what the human zoo is actually doing for you, how it's actually hindering you, what it's preventing you from doing, and how it's essentially making your life worse.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could kind of sum up roughly what it's actually causing, because the thing that comes up for me straight away is like social media, being distracted all the time makes you completely ineffective, focusing and actually doing stuff and making progress. It's causing procrastination.
Mm-hmm.
You got things like just pornography, just being like easy to access, which is like messing with people's relationships and screwing with people's dopamine systems in the brain and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that just comes off the top of my head instantly there. Wondering if you'd had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's endless specifics, but I think that you can think of it as, if you can basically categorize it as like as mental and physical health issues. Where you mentioned a bunch of mental ones, where it disconnects you from true, like, real life social connections. It causes chronic stress, etc., etc. That's all bad for you. And then physical issues where, you live in an environment where the path of least resistance leads to rotting teeth, obesity, heart disease, hypertension, etc., etc. And obviously, like, on a personal level, that is just a lot of suffering. We're talking about a lot of suffering and discontent. And the physical suffering is, pretty obvious, but then also the mental suffering, just like it's not normal for people to be so worried and to have such struggles with things like self-worth issues and just like all this mental noise, all this emotional distress that people are in. This is also, a lot of this comes down to being stuck in the human zoo. And this is what it causes. And look, one of the ways to think about this, like to make it very specific, like we've talked about a bunch of statistics, but you have, and this is happening all the time, it's like someone dies, and this person was, a father, a husband, maybe a grandfather, and they died relatively young after a long period of suffering. And there's maybe also then, depending on where in the world they are, there's maybe problems with like debt because of medical bills and stuff like that. Like, think about the amount of suffering that causes. Someone dying from a heart attack, where, like after a long history of medical problems, where everyone in the family is worried and stressed, and eventually after all this struggle, they die, and they die too soon. Maybe they were still the breadwinner in the family. It's like, think of all the suffering this causes. The kids missing their father, etc., etc. And it could have been prevented with lifestyle changes. That is the thing that I think we need to be aware of. We are not talking just about, if you uninstall Twitter on your phone, you'll be a bit less miserable and distracted. No, we're talking about like real human tragedy that's happening all the time. It's happening at a shocking rate globally. Real deep human tragedy. And the same for, like, think about the suicide, right? Think about the suicide. How much of that would be preventable? There's probably not all of it. I don't know. But clearly, because we can see there's such a steep rise, we can look that not very far in the past, these people would have lived, right? The environment, the conditions in the human zoo a couple of years ago were such that these thousands of people would have lived, but they killed themselves. And think about the depth of that tragedy. So, that's, if you want to make it visceral, that's how to think about it.
Yeah, that I think that hits it home. And to add to that, there is, and we've spoken about this a lot, that there is in life there's enough suffering anyway, right? It's like you live a good life. Eventually, there'll be some things that just blindside you, and it's kind of unavoidable. But it does certainly seem that recently the far reaches of suffering that humanity is experiencing seems to be preventable.
So let's talk a bit about how to break free from the human zoo. And to do that, I want to briefly talk about what's called a supernormal stimulus. And we will link to a cartoon or a comic about this, which is great, which everyone should look at, about supernormal stimuli. And I'm going to change the term here. So the scientific term for this is a supernormal stimulus. But supernormal doesn't make intuitive sense. So instead, I'm going to call it a hyperstimulus.
I was going to say, this is extremely normal.
Yeah, this is everything's in order here. Yeah. So what supernormal means is greater than normal. So it's a hyperstimulus. And I want to talk about this because this is kind of a key to how to break free. So an example of a supernormal stimulus or a hyperstimulus is that it's basically there's certain things that animals are kind of programmed to respond to. And an example of that is you have, I can't remember what bird it was, but some bird that has its eggs are like these white eggs with blue dots. And the bird is responding to a stimulus that says, if you see a white ball with blue dots on it, sit on it, right? Until it hatches, basically. And the bigger the egg, the more you should prioritize hatching it. So if there's a small egg over here and the bigger egg over here, hatch the big one, right? And that makes sense. Makes sense. A big egg is more likely to have a healthy baby bird inside it, presumably. The problem is that you can hijack this system, this shortcut that the bird uses to decide which egg to hatch. You can just put a plastic ball that is larger. So here's the nest with real eggs, and next to it you have a plastic ball that's larger than the eggs with blue dots on it. And the bird will see that and it'll sit on the plastic ball. So it doesn't realize that that's not an egg, and it will neglect the real eggs in favor of the plastic ball. And it will do that completely beyond reason. Even if it's a huge plastic ball that's bigger than the bird itself, as long as it's white and has blue dots, it will sit on it, right? So this is an experiment that shows that you can so that would be the hyperstimulus. It is the thing that the bird responds to blown out of proportion, and the bird responds to it even more. That's a hyperstimulus. And the same experiment can be done on loads of different animals, including on humans. There are things that we respond to. And one of the major problems in the human zoo is that we are surrounded by hyperstimuli. We are surrounded by messages and things that are essentially carefully designed to hijack our attention in the same way that the large plastic ball with the blue dots hijacks the attention of that bird.
This is why the notification sort of numbers and icons and stuff, you'll see red. Mm-hmm. You'll see red everywhere. Like a notification on Facebook is red, the message is red. But there's something about red that humans respond to more than any other color.
Yeah.
That might be because of blood. That might signal sort of danger, blood, but also like ripe fruit in a tree, for example. But red we respond to.
Yeah. And this is a good example of a hyperstimulus, right? Because it's hijacking. So something tells us, pay attention to this. And the notification badge, that's like the fake plastic ball version of that, right? Whatever we're expecting a ripe berry is not there, But also, and it's been carefully designed, right? So the sound your phone makes, the way it vibrates, the shade of red, and so on, everything has gone through thousands and thousands of test iterations, optimized for how can we get people to pick up their phones and respond to this thing. And that is an example of a hyperstimulus where you're basically, you're hijacking the human brain, right? You're going in there are subtle cues that we respond to, and we pull out that one thread that makes us respond involuntarily, and we amplify it as strongly as we can. And you mentioned porn before, which I think is actually a great example of something that's hyperstimulating as well. It's like in a natural environment, obviously you would seek out sexual signals, but you wouldn't find them very often. So whenever you see a sexual signal, like you respond to that strongly. Well, with porn, you can see more naked women or naked, whatevers. You can see anything naked.
Pornhub's getting pretty wild now.
So you can see more of those sexual signals, those sexual availability signals in an hour than your ancestors could have seen in their entire life.
Easily, yeah.
And we're also seeing literal hyperstimuli there where, strangely enough, it tends to shift. So it's like in the 90s, it was huge breasts where you had, that was kind of the thing, right? It's like fake breasts, even ridiculously oversized fake breasts seem to work, right? And now it has moved to butts for some reason.
Yeah, the butt implants, that's a thing.
Yeah, where now we have ridiculously oversized butts and butt implants. And also, of course, then the whole photo manipulation, right, where people take pictures of themselves and then just blow that stuff out of proportion. Well, that's a hyperstimulus. Like something inside you goes, ooh, pay attention to this. This is important. And you can blow it into completely ridiculous proportions and you still respond to it, and you respond to it more strongly.
Yeah, that's pretty damn powerful. When I used to be hooked on porn, it's one thing. Like I've went through a process of weaning myself off it, and now I'm off it completely. And one thing I noticed was that I wasn't finding like real women as attractive, and that had become normal for me.
Right.
Where it's like, I'll talk to them, I'll acknowledge that they're beautiful or whatever, but I wouldn't feel that sense of, oh, hello. I wouldn't feel that. And for some reason, and I think this might be a result of the normalization of porn, I didn't connect the dots on that for such a long time.
Yeah.
When it's just like, hang on, that's not particularly normal, especially when I was like 25, 26. It's like a young guy, not really stimulated by real women that much. It's just, and why is that? Because I'm just getting super normal stimuli all the time, easily accessible. For just no effort whatsoever.
Yeah. And then you're like, ooh, normal proportions.
Normal proportions, normal human bodies. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's weird. Yeah, this is super weird that happens. Yeah. And so, yeah, those are examples of technology that uses hyperstimulation to get us. And the important thing is like it's involuntary. So obviously we're more complex beings than the bird that ends up sitting on the plastic ball, but it's the same kind of thing. It's like the bird can't prevent itself from responding like that. And it's the same like when you're exposed to these stimuli, you can even if you don't respond to it. So even if you hear the phone and you hear the notifications coming in, and you can sit here and go, no, I'm not going to reach for the phone. And even if you successfully do that, every time that sound comes on, part of your brain, part of your attention is going there. And, there's a part of you that goes, I want to pick up the phone. Even if you're sitting there resisting it, it's costing you some bandwidth. It's costing you some of your energy to not pick up the phone because there's no way for you to hear the notification and have a zero response to it. It is much too well designed for that.
Yeah, and that attention, that's happening just completely pre-conscious.
Exactly.
Pre-consciously,
Yeah. Now, another example of this that I think is very relevant for a lot of the health issues we talked about is the food industry, where the food industry over decades have, specialized in this kind of hyperstimulation as well. And it's the hyperstimulation of like highly engineered foods that also go through endless amounts of test iterations to make them just the right amount of crunchy, just the right amount of whatever it is that we respond to, And it's also hyperstimulating because, okay, we clearly we respond to fat and sugar in a way where we really prioritize that. Because again, it presumably will be very scarce in nature. So if you get something that's very sweet, good stuff, get as much of it as possible. But now we are creating foods that are hyper sweet and they're abundantly available. And, basically the secret to almost every kind of, every mass-produced, mass-consumed food is it's a combination of lots of fat plus lots of salt or lots of fat plus lots of sugar. That covers most of the foods you can buy in a supermarket. Why is that? Well, it's because that's what's hyperstimulating. That's why you end up with pizza that has more and more and more and more cheese on it, and yeah, sugary drinks and stuff, where even if you pick up the all natural orange juice or whatever, it's like it has spoonfuls of sugar added. Why? Because, again, pre-consciously, you drink it, something in your brain goes, this is great because it has more sugar than the other one. You should get this one again. Plus, packaging design as well. There's huge amounts of research and optimization has gone into creating packages that get our attention, that make us want the thing. And this is why the human zoo exists, right? It's not the case that someone deliberately constructed the human zoo to cause all these problems for us. It's just a matter of incentives. If I want to make more money and I'm selling food, then I can quickly, if I'm optimizing for more money, which makes sense in a capitalist society, I go, okay, how do I make more money? Well, it seems that if we have like big, bright red letters on the packaging, that seems to work. More people buy my thing. If we add more sugar, that's pretty cheap and people love it, and so on. And so that creates the system that is constantly hyperstimulating us. And it's all basically against our own interests, right?
Yeah.
This is all bad for us, unfortunately.
And the thing is, when it comes to food, I read an article on precisionnutrition.com, which I'm going to find, which talks about how the foods are engineered specifically to appeal to a few different textures, and the more those textures can be combined in a single food, the more that's going to have seems to have an appeal. So one of them is crunch. One of them is like the crunchy texture. The second one is like gooiness.
Okay.
And I can't remember exactly what the third one is, but there was three. And it talks about how like when you combine these things, and you'll notice this with like different types of chocolate and stuff like that. You'll have, we've got this outer shell, and then you've got this sort of like soft chocolate, and then gooey center. It's like, why is that?
And for me, by the way, food is such a clear example of this, because that's still true. Like, I have no self-control around food, and I tend to eat way too fast. I tend to overeat. And it's really one of those things where it's so clear. Like, I know all of these things. I've been aware of all of these things for a long time, and I cannot resist the stimulation. I can't resist the stimulation.
You do eat fast. I have noticed that.
Dude, that is me trying to eat slow, So the reason we're talking about this again, so how do you break free? Well, the reason we've talked about all this in such detail is because the first step is you have to recognize it. You have to start seeing this problem. Otherwise, you can't ever avoid it, right? But the other thing is, look, the realization here is that you have certain incentives that create a certain environment, and that environment shapes behavior. And this is something, you're going to hear this a lot on the Icario podcast and in Icario content. Environment shapes behavior. Far more than anything else, your environment shapes your behavior. Now, as a proud human, you maybe don't like to hear this. You think, no, I decide. I decide what I do. I have willpower. Actually, no, it's mostly your environment, right? If you show me a person I've never seen before, and I need to tell you who they are, if I can either only see their to-do list or only see their environment, I'm going to look at their environment and tell you who they are. That's far more reliable.
Yes, for sure. And just there's two things. One of them is in the show notes. Going to put a link in there to an article called Whole Food Island, which talks about this in greater depth, because this is one of the core principles. I think it's really important to notice, really important to become aware of this. The second thing is that is 100% true. So I used to have a client. It was an online fitness client, and she was a woman who was overweight, and she wanted to not be overweight anymore. And we were struggling for a while to implement healthy habits and stuff. But it was only after we started to just talk about what her environment was that things started to maybe shift a little bit, because her entire family was obese. And the whole eating habits were abysmal. She wanted to change. She was the youngest of three sisters. The whole family, they all lived under one roof, and they all ordered takeaway 4 or 5 times a week and stuff like that. And it'd just be this this ecosystem that seemed to just reward this stuff. And she started to break out of this, and they would sort of like shame her into pulling her back in. Her sisters would be like, "Oh, you're trying to be better than me," and stuff like that. It's like, Jesus Christ. When I learned about the depth of this, I was just thinking the odds are stacked against this poor lady. She wants to change something, but her entire family are just like preventing this actively. And then it just makes me think, because what I wanted to do was, if I had the power, just like pick her up and just for like 8 weeks or so, just to show her that something else is possible, just put her in a very different environment.
Yeah.
And the weight would just fly off. I know it would.
Yeah, for sure.
But right now, right in that situation, she is fighting a losing battle.
Yeah. It's super hard. It's super hard to defy your environment. But that also means that in order to break out of the human zoo, start taking control of your environment. So start shaping your environment. Start thinking about what is in my environment. This is why we were talking about apps and notifications and stuff. Well, that is basically environmental pollution. If I live in an environment where there's constantly notifications dinging at me, or, even like the example of porn, obviously if I can just look at porn at any time, like the easier it is to do that, the harder it will be to resist. Well, the same thing is like something like Instagram is like, a lot of Instagram is kind of porn light, So if it's right there and it's notifying me at any time, I can take out this thing and I'll see, beautiful people with exaggerated proportions. That is a factor of my environment. Whereas I also have a phone. I don't have Instagram on there. So for me, it would take several extra steps to get to the picture of, some girl squatting in yoga pants. And that is enough. That is enough for me to not constantly do it, right? So that's kind of the value of uninstalling apps and getting off of these platforms, is that you are adding barriers between you and the immediate stimulation that beckons. So that's essentially cleaning up your digital environment. And the same is true for your physical environment, where, well, one of the things is like the thing I mentioned with shoes, right? Well, you can buy different kinds of shoes. And it then becomes, it's basically a zero effort solution. It's like all the shoes I have are barefoot style shoes. I don't have to make an effort to have healthier feet, it just happens. And another example with food is that because I know that I can't control myself around food, like I have to use my willpower while I'm buying groceries. I have to make sure that when I'm buying groceries, I don't buy any unhealthy foods. Because if I do buy a sleeve of cookies, I'm going to just chomp through them in an instant when I get home. Because I'm not someone who can have like one cookie a day. And plus, I also know that because it has sugar, I'll get addicted. If I have a sleeve of cookies, I'll have a much stronger desire to get more stuff with sugar in it. I get very easily addicted to sugar. And it escalates. And before you know it, I'm just eating sugary stuff all day. So I know that I have to make sure that in the environment where I spend most of my time, there is no unhealthy junk food for me, in reach. So, and similarly, there's lots of other stuff. So for example, in my living room, I clearly prioritize like movement. Like half of my living room is basically a gym area. And that's something where I prioritize that in the sense that I'm using this space for that purpose. Even if it's, it's maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing way to use your living room or something like that, to turn it into a gym. And I also spend money on this. I spend money on having gym equipment and stuff. But it means that every time I walk through there's all these different like toys, basically, different weights and pull-up bar and stuff that beckon me, instead of there just being a super comfy couch and the Netflix subscription that beckons me, which is another thing. I don't have a Netflix subscription. I don't have a TV. I don't have anything like that. Because again, if I walk into my living room, there's a comfy couch and there's unlimited entertainment on a big screen. Well, guess what I'm going to do with my time? But if I walk into my living room and there's a pull-up bar and kettlebells and stuff, even just that with no willpower added will change the outcomes in my life very significantly. And I also want to mention an alternative here, because having like a home gym is a fairly high budget solution. But this is something that I kind of accidentally did as a teenager when I was still living with my parents and I was broke, basically. What I did is in my room, I cleared I cleared as much of the floor space as possible. And I got rid of some of my furniture and stuff. So just have maximal floor space in my room so that I could move. And at the time I was training martial arts a lot, so I could practice martial arts stuff in my room. And I also had like a dumbbell, it was like a single, I could afford one dumbbell basically. But again, like think about it. If I didn't have this cleared space in my room, there would always be additional friction to if I want to practice martial arts. So either I have to move some stuff in my room, clear some space, or I have to go outside, but then maybe the weather is crap and so on. But by creating this environment, by making this adjustment to my environment, was basically no friction to me exercising and moving when I was in my room. And that is an example, and that's a low budget solution. It involves mainly getting rid of things. So that's, again, an example of just changing my environment in such a way that there's less friction to doing the things that I want to be doing that are good for me.
Yeah. There's another idea here, is the social environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we could even create a whole podcast around that.
For sure.
Because obviously the social environment, and the example I gave with my ex-client, her social environment was that the people she was spending the vast majority of her time with were people who were exhibiting certain behaviors. And as I said, it was that ecosystem of behaviors that led to that result. And the reality was, I don't know how she's doing now, but the reality was that if she wanted to be healthy, she could not spend as much time around those people as she was doing, without having to fight this uphill battle. So it's like it seems to me that the social environment, like who you're spending your time with, seems to be a really powerful determinant of what your results are going to be.
Yeah. I mean, a starting point is we have the How to Get Your Shit Together part 4 or something.
I should know this.
Social. But yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes as well. So that's some more about how to start designing your social circle, your social environment. And yes, that's definitely an important factor. And yeah, and basically, and so on. I think that the main recommendation here, because we'll definitely go into more specific details on what to do, and we'll also do a bunch of experiments that will show and document on our YouTube channel and things like that. Like this is going to be a recurring topic, how to break free from the human zoo in very practical ways. But I think, we've ran through a bunch of examples here of things to do. But again, the most important thing to me is to gain an understanding of this problem and to start seeing it. Because, look, there's no chance we can't make the complete list of how to break free from the human zoo. Because it's like, what is your environment doing to you right now? What are your specific circumstances? And if you have that in mind, if you think about, okay, the environment is generally inhumane, or a lot of my environment is inhumane, and it's causing all these problems. And the way I can solve this problem, the way I can start breaking free, is by becoming aware of it and by experimenting with changing my environment. That's the most important thing. And you will then find ways to kind of, create your custom solutions for your custom individual situation. And that's what I'd encourage everyone to do. And also, I think this is something that's worth starting a dialogue about. We can have a conversation about this. This is something, you can comment on YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, you can go to the show notes on icario.com and leave a comment there. If you're a member of our community, we can talk about it there. You can send us a message. Like, there's all kinds of ways to get in touch, right? But this is something that I think is really worth communicating, also with people around you. But it's like, if you have questions about this, if you see specific problems in your environment and you're not sure how to solve them, or if you have found your own solutions for ways of how to break free from your specific human zoo, let's have a conversation about that. So send us a message, send us your questions, and let's get this conversation started and keep this conversation going. I think this is one of the most important things we can do to upgrade our civilization, right? To upgrade the state of what it means to be a human being. This is, and it's fundamentally important, right? This is one of the reasons I started Icario. It's one of the reasons we're talking about this is there are so many deeply tragic and completely solvable problems in our world. So I think it's one of the most important things we can do is start paying attention to that and start making the changes and experimenting with changes we can make to implement these solutions.
Sounds good. Is that everything?
Yeah, let's wrap it up here. I think we've been going on for long enough. So that is our take on what the human zoo is and why you need to get out. So show notes are going to be below the video. And if you're watching this on YouTube, and I don't know what this is, like episode 9 or something, who knows?
I think this is episode 9.
All right.
I think so. But we'll
so
see. I could be wrong.
You can try going to icario.com/009 and see what happens.
And if not, then this bit would be edited out anyway.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Once again, it was shining professionalism here, as always. But anyway, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time, guys. Thank you.